Hi guys, welcome to the channel. I'm going to be going through my 2022 F1 race tier list. I've just watched all the race highlights back, so they're fairly fresh in my mind. So we've got 5 categories. The further left they are, the higher they are in that category. So we've got Abu Dhabi, which was actually the last race of the season. Although this was the season finale, the championship was already won. So Max tied up the championship win in Japan. There was still second place worth fighting for between Leclerc and Perez, but honestly, it wasn't a great race to be honest. The track, I have mixed feelings. I think it's a decent track, but we never really see that great racing. Mainly, I think due to the 2 really large DRS straights down the backside of the track. I think we just sort of, there's no point in overtaking on the rest of the circuit because it's just so easy to pass there. Although we did see Joe pull off a great move, I think it was on Albon. I think this is going to be an alright, pretty dull. It was, I can't think it was decent, kept me fairly entertained throughout. There was nothing rubbish about it, but yeah, just nothing really special, especially for a season finale. So next on the list, Australia. The first time we've had Australia back in a little while since COVID, and yeah, there's a few changes to the track, a few more DRS zones, they've straightened out a few corners, and there was nothing that special about it to be honest, but I thought it was decent. So I put it in a category. I think it's better than Abu Dhabi, but as a whole, I don't think it's a brilliant track to be honest. Now, for me, this is a contender for race of the season. There's some really great racing there. We had those like 5 cars going around that one corner, which was sort of one of the highlights of the season for a lot of people. Having the sort of regulations show they worked that well and have all those cars racing one another. And yeah, I think it was the second sprint race weekend after Imola. Sprint was a little bit dull, but the race really didn't disappoint. And for me, yeah, it's probably between that and then one other track for race of the season. Bahrain next, and this one was the first race of the season, and this is one of the only races I think that led people to have a lot of high expectations for the season for racing between Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc, which we didn't really get to see for a lot of the season due to reliability, strategy, all sorts of things. But for me, with Leclerc and Verstappen fighting for the win, constantly overtaking each other down that straight, it was great racing and it was clean racing, and yeah, I'll put it in amazing. It was a really good race to be honest. Now we move on to a track that typically has great racing. I had high expectations going into it, but I was left pretty disappointed to be honest, and it was Baku. Now we had both Ferraris DNFing in this race. There was actually no safety car. I think there was a VSC, but there was no safety car at all, which is extremely rare for a track like Baku. The top 4 drivers won by over 70 seconds sort of combined compared to everyone else on the track, and there's a 20-second gap between P1, P2, P3 and P4, which just shows how spread out the field was. There wasn't much racing at all, and I would put it in alright, pretty dull. It might even be in the wash category. It wasn't great. I think it was a one-off. We normally get really good races there, just not this year. Brazil, and this is another one that is up there with race of the season for me. Now I'd actually put it better than Austria. We obviously had the Russell win, the Magnussen pole, which I'm not really taking into account qualifying, it's more just a race. But as a whole, I think this race, having Mercedes win, I think it was a brilliant race, and I'd quite like to see Brazil as the season finale. I think it would just add a lot more interest to the F1 calendar. Canada next on the list, and that is another track we haven't seen on the calendar for a while because of COVID. And yeah, I sort of had a lot of high expectations for Canada. Obviously it's a classic track. And I thought it was decent. It was a decent race. The new generation of cars are clearly good for going around that track. A lot of overtakes. Some standout performances. I think Sainz had a great drive. Zhou, I think he got promoted to P8 in the end to get some solid points. But yeah, I don't think it's good enough to be amazing. I think it was decent. And it's probably better than Australia. Now, Kota is another one that's fairly recent in my mind. One of the highlights of that race for me was Vettel and K-Mag on the last lap. Vettel going around the outside and overtaking Magnussen. But yeah, this was a amazing race. Was it better than Bahrain? I think it wasn't as good as Bahrain, just mainly due to the fact we didn't see as much racing at the front of the field between the top drivers as we did in Bahrain. But yeah, it was still a brilliant track. France next, and a track that isn't on the calendar next season, and I think that is fair, although this race seemed like it had a lot of potential before Leclerc crashed after he was leading, and Sainz, who was in P3, and then Ferrari decided to pit him on lap with 10 laps to go, which dropped him down to P9, and I think he ended up finishing 5th. Strange for Ferrari, another questionable strategy, obviously a big mistake from Leclerc, and I would put this race as probably either bottom of decent but nothing special, or top of alright but pretty dull. Probably because of the strategy mistakes and the Leclerc crash. This isn't just which tracks do I think was the best racing and overtakes, it was which was the best race to watch, and I think that gave a fair amount of entertainment, to be honest. If anything, I might even put it above Australia. Next on the list is Hungary. We had George Russell's first pole in the Mercedes. An absolute disaster strategy for Ferrari, which managed to secure Mercedes a double podium. Yeah, we just saw another dominant race from Verstappen. And yeah, I think Hungary's a good track. I think it has all the benefits of Monaco, but with allowing some decent chances for overtakes. I like Monaco, I want to see it on the calendar, but I think Hungary is a superior track, and I think it falls in that same category. Tight, narrow, not many overtaking spots. So this year, yeah, fairly decent. I'd probably put it at the top of decent, but nothing special. I don't think you could call it amazing, but yeah, really decent race, to be honest. Imola, and this was the first sprint weekend of the 2022 season. Trying to remember back, I think the sprint race was fairly dull. A lot of drivers getting stuck, if I remember. I think it was a wet track that was drying, but we didn't really see any overtakes as there was one dry line, and the track just didn't seem to dry whatsoever. We did see Leclerc spinning, which gave Lando a podium, which was actually the only podium we saw from a non-Ferrari, Red Bull or Mercedes driver the whole season, which we probably didn't realise early on that was going to happen. But yeah, I'm not a massive fan of Imola, to be honest. I don't think you see that many great overtakes. There's that long straight with the DRS which people pass, but I think when we already have Monza, I don't think Imola should potentially be sort of a fixed circuit on the calendar. Maybe it should be a rotation track. If it was up for debate to be replaced by the German or South African Grand Prix, I'd probably let it go, to be honest. But yeah, this year, Imola, I'd probably give it, I'd say it's probably just behind Hungary. I think it was a better race. Actually, no, I'd probably drop it behind Canada. But yeah, slightly better than France. Japanese Grand Prix, and this was one that sort of stands out. We obviously had a lot of rain, which caused the race to be red flagged. We didn't see hardly any racing. I think the race lasted only 20 minutes, which Verstappen managed to gain something ridiculous, like a 25-second lead to the race. I really wish we could have seen a full dry race round Japan, because I do think it's probably one of the top 5 circuits on the calendar. But yeah, this year wasn't it for the Japanese Grand Prix, and it was a pretty dull race, to be honest, especially when you're waiting that long. Not brilliant from the first Japanese Grand Prix back with the new regulation cars, to be honest. Mexico next, and got to be honest, Mexico is my least favourite track on the 2022 calendar. I just can't remember a good race there, to be honest. It was fairly interesting with strategy. We had Ferrari and Red Bull, I think, sort of splitting half the drivers on the one stop, half on the two stop. Ferrari doing the two stop, which seemed like the favourite at the start of the race. Clearly wasn't probably the optimum strategy, and this was probably where Mercedes got to the point where they could start winning races, as I think they arguably had the fastest car that weekend. But yeah, wasn't to be. Didn't really see much racing at all whatsoever. We had a strong weekend performance from Daniel Ricciardo after he crashed into Sonoda, was it? But yeah, really don't enjoy Mexico. And it's probably, I think it's got to go in the wash category. Don't like it, don't look forward to it. And I'd happily see it gone off the F1 calendar, to be honest. Miami next, and this was the first race we've had here. Introduction to the track, and it was a strange one, to be honest. I think it has potential. It's not my favourite track layout. Wasn't a fan of the whole just sort of build up around to the whole race. There's a lot of focus on celebrities, things like that. I don't think it really highlighted F1 and racing. It was more of a sort of a popularity event. Strong weekends from Bottas stand out. And yeah, we had a rare DNF from Lando on that weekend. But I think I'd give it the benefit of the doubt. I did enjoy it being the first race there we've had. I'm not looking forward to it massively next year, but I am going to keep it open. So I think I'd rate Miami. I think I'd rate it the best of all right. I don't think it was decent. And also, this isn't what I think of the track. This is what I think of the actual race. So, for example, Japan is in one of the worst, but I'd probably rank it as a top 3 or 4 track on the calendar. So, talking of better tracks, Monaco next. And yeah, we had a wet weekend here. I think it was another red flag weekend. We're delayed to the race start, and yeah, it was very processional. A little bit of interest as Ferrari should have won the race, had 1-2 I think it was, and just completely bottled the strategy, which gave Perez a win, which was fairly interesting. But you just know that there's not going to be no fighting back for that once he was in the lead. So I think this was a pretty poor race. Probably more interesting than Mexico for me, but yeah, not really that interesting. Monza next on the list, and now this is one of my favourite tracks on the calendar. This season, I'd have to say it was the worst race of the year, quite comfortably, to be honest. We had a fair amount of overtaking at the start, which was sort of kind of interesting, but we had that big drama incident by Daniel Ricciardo breaking down on the side of the road. He brought out a safety car on lap 48 out of 53, which, with 5 laps to go, you think, right, bring out a quick safety car, get rid of his car, and do a sprint for the final 3 or 4 laps, which would be sort of pretty good, to be honest. We didn't see that. Nothing they just didn't seem to clear the car. I don't know if they had issues pushing it away because it was stuck in gear, or it was far from a hole in the wall where they could get the car actually off the track. But yeah, the race ended under safety car, very rare, but these things happen. I'd rather race under safety car than go and racing in unsafe conditions. But for me, it was the worst race of the season. Jeddah now, and yeah, another new track, not the first race we've had here. But I think this has grown on a lot of people. I think a lot of people are starting to really like this Saudi Arabia track. It's something really different. It doesn't really have any similarities to any other tracks. It's very like you just go out one way, hit a hairpin, come back another way, and it's just like a long sweeping section. It's fun to drive on the F1 game, and we had some good racing here again between Leclerc and Verstappen. We had some teammate drama between Ocon and Alonso. We had the Leclerc Verstappen DRS chicken, which was, I don't know if I thought we were going to see that a lot this season. Turned out we didn't, but it was fairly fun to watch, fairly interesting to see drivers actually backing out of a corner so they could get DRS. And I'll say this is a pretty good race. I'd say it was probably between Kota and Bahrain for me. I don't think it was as good as Bahrain, but yeah, one of the better races this season. So with 5 tracks left, let's have a look. And Silverstone now, and yeah, it probably doesn't surprise many people, but Silverstone was in my opinion, was the race of the season. We had Carlos Sainz getting his first win. Some brilliant racing between Perez, was it Leclerc or Sainz, and Hamilton going through. The classic commentary, I think that'll go down in history, sort of some of the best commentary for Crofty. We obviously had that horrific crash from Zhou, which was horrible to see. Glad he got recovered from that and was fine. But yeah, the racing as a whole, it was brilliant. Silverstone is one of the best tracks on the calendar, if not the best. And for me, it was the best race of the season. Singapore next, and it's a bit of a weird one. It's first another race we haven't had in a while. It was a wet track that was drying. It just didn't seem to dry whatsoever. There was kind of like a dry line, and then nothing on the track seemed to dry. I think it was super humid. There's a few drivers like Verstappen trying to overtake Norris, but he just locked up. You couldn't really do much, to be honest, on that race, just because of the track conditions. I think it's a great track. I'm looking forward to it next year. Hopefully we get some drier racing, which I think we'll see some better chances for overtakes. I'd probably put it in decent, where I think it wasn't as good as Hungary, wasn't as good as Canada, Imola or France as well, to be honest. I think it's probably, I'd rate it slightly better than Australia, but not by much. Spain next on the list. And for a Spanish Grand Prix, this was probably as good as you're going to get. We obviously had Leclerc's car setting on fire, which wasn't good. Another race where Ferrari I think this was the start of Ferrari's downfall from when they were actually leading, to when they just started dropping points every race weekend. I think as a track, not a massive fan, but as a race, it was fairly decent. Definitely not amazing. Not as good as Hungary, but probably slightly better than Canada, I would say. I think it was pretty enjoyable for a Spanish Grand Prix. Belgium next, and one of my favourite tracks on the calendar. Normally has some great racing. Arguably haven't actually had that many classic races there in the past couple of years. Obviously, the year before this one, we had the rain, where it rained it off, and we saw the whole race behind a safety car, which was rubbish. And yeah, this weekend, it wasn't great. I think it was just the Verstappen dominance across the whole race weekend, which just made it boring. But yeah, I think a lot of people came out of it quite disappointed, to be honest, for a Belgian Grand Prix. I think people have high standards for this race. It feels wrong putting it behind Miami and Abu Dhabi, but I think it probably was, to be honest. I don't know, would I say it's decent? I think it's probably the best out of all right. I wouldn't say it was a decent race. It was pretty boring, to be honest. So the final track on the list is Zandvoort. Now, this one was pretty decent, to be honest. We had that Tsunoda controversy, which caused the safety car, which kind of messed up Mercedes' strategy. Looked like they could potentially actually win this race. But yeah, that caused a lot of drama and interest and speculation. We had the classic Ferrari disaster class pit stops, and we actually had a rare Verstappen incident with him spinning. But he still went on to win this race. Not a massive fan of Zandvoort, to be honest. I think it's alright, but not one of my favourite tracks. I'd probably say it was between Hungary and Spain for my final ranking. So yeah, this is my tier list. Left is best of the category compared to right. So best race of the season, Silverstone, then Brazil, Austria. Heading down all the way to the bottom, where my bottom three were Monaco, Mexico and Monza. So thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, and feel free to comment what your best and worst race of the season were. And yeah, if you could subscribe, it really helps to make the channel grow. And yeah, a lot of my viewers aren't subscribed to the channel, so it'd be great to sort of gain that number going forward. But thanks for watching to the end if you've made it this far, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers.